Do not reach on the tight end position in fantasy football drafts for 2025. There is a ton of value on the board. We're going to break it all down here today on First Street Fantasy.
To me, it's looking counterfeit. I get done with one, then move right on to another bitch. Yeah. College educated, she graduated.
All right, coach. So the first guy that we are going to talk about today is going to be David Njoku. This is one of your guys that you selected for this list. And David Njoku right now, tight end 10, pick 118 off the board. He finishes tight end 11 in 2024. Why do you think David Njoku is somebody that's a good value and somebody that we should be targeting this year?
So, one of the things about David Njoku last season is he only played in 11 games. He was injured for a chunk of the season. And in those 11 games, Njoku still managed 97 targets. I mean, if he'd played a full season, he would have been easily been 135 to 145 target range. Stefanski loves tight ends. He also loves Njoku. He has seen increased usage under Stefanski. He was tight end 10, then he moved up to tight end 6. Last year, he was tight end 11, would have easily been tight end 7 or higher had he not gotten injured. And I just think that usage continues to grow this season with not a lot of options around him. And Njoku seems like the best pass catcher, in my opinion, in the building.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. When you think about the stats from last season, and look, this is a new season, right? So it's important to close the book on last year and look forward to this year. But we would be remiss if we didn't note that David Njoku was number 5 in target share for tight ends last year, 22.8%. He was number 6 in total targets. As coach mentioned, he had 97 and would have probably paced out to be even higher on that list. David Njoku, tight end 5 in points per game over the last 2 seasons with 12.95 and yards after catch, right? We're looking for guys that, have big playability, and he's has 850 yards after catch, which is fourth over the last 2 seasons at the tight end position. You pair that up with a guy that gets a ton of volume and has big playability, playing on a team that I think has not really a great defense. They should be in line to throw the football. One more thing I wanted to note about Njoku is just one of 5 tight ends with 90 plus targets on average over the last 3 seasons straight. That's Travis Kelce, Hawkinson, Njoku, and Kittle. On top of that, you have Evan Engram. Those are the 5. He's one of those players. We know the volume's going to be there. And just like Coach said, this is arguably the best pass catching weapon in this offense. Coach, do you have anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, Tillman and Judy, while they've proven last year to be solid players, I do think Njoku, especially at his position, to me is the most significant matchup problem that the Browns will have. Given their quarterback concerns, I do think Stefanski will go out of his way to use that mismatch to his advantage this year, and I think that could increase Njoku's usage even further.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the next player that we're going to talk about is going to be Mark Andrews, who this is a guy. I mean, everyone seems to be fading him, coach. I'm not exactly sure why. Currently, Andrews is being drafted as the tight end 7, pick 106. And last year, coach, the tight end 7 was being drafted around pick 60 to 65. It was Evan Engram. I think a lot of people overdrafted the tight end position last year in fantasy. And now we're getting a very strong overcorrection where it's pushing a ton of guys down the board that we like, and they're at a really good value. Like I said, outside of the top 100 for Mark Andrews, who was a guy that finished as the tight end 6 last year, I think it's awesome value and a player that I think everybody should be targeting, especially if he's falling this far in your drafts.
Yeah, and people spent half of last season writing Mark Andrews off just like they do every year. And I know that this isn't last season, but it seems like it's a repetitive thing every year. They want to write Mark Andrews off, and he just finds a way. He's proven time and time again to be Lamar Jackson's favorite option in the red zone. I don't see that changing this year at all. I mean, he caught 11 touchdowns last year. While it may be hard to repeat that, he's definitely going to have the chance to catch 6, 7, 8 touchdowns again this year. And I do think Lamar Jackson is going to find him in the red zone. even though Lamar Jackson's numbers are likely to go down a little bit. I don't see him throwing 40 touchdowns. I do think, that Mark Andrews is going to get a high percentage of what touchdowns he does throw once again.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are banking on Isaiah Likely, right, coming in, possibly taking over this role. There's been some strong offseason talk from the head coach about Isaiah Likely, and they're predicting him to be a Pro Bowler, right? I think it's coach speak, right? You have two players here in Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely who are both in contract years. So, I mean, Andrews is playing for likely his last payday. Isaiah Likely is playing for his first big payday, but we've seen one player do it and one other guy that hasn't done it. And I think it's important to note that Andrews fractured his fibula and had ligament damage in 2023, right? Ending his season early. Coming into 2024, he got into that car accident in training camp, right? He ended up, I think, practicing pretty quickly after that car accident. And I think that contributed likely to a slow start with the fibula, with the car accident, right? And he didn't start strong out of the gate, right? Isaiah Likely, everybody remembers that 20 plus game against the Chiefs where he exploded, and people were telling you, look at Mark Andrews' usage, look at Isaiah Likely, look at the week, like, and people were literally dropping Mark Andrews after week 1 to go pick up Isaiah Likely. And how did that work out for people, coach? You look at last year, Isaiah Likely did not perform for fantasy, right? He doesn't concern me at all. Likely ran 203 routes last year. Andrews ran 293. He produced just 4 games over 10 points on the season. I think he was fool's gold last year after his 26-point outing. I think he's going to be fool's gold again this year. And I'm still pounding the table for Mark Andrews, especially at this cost.
Yeah, I also think it's very telling too that the Ravens didn't give up on Mark Andrews after that slow start. Everybody was ready to write him off, and the Ravens stuck in there. They had a really good football team. They kept Mark Andrews on the field running routes until eventually things got worked out, and he ascended back to one of the top pass catching tight ends in the NFL. And I don't see that changing any. I'm so over the Isaiah Likely hype at this point. That's all we've heard for the last couple of years. While he's a solid player, I just think he's a solid number 2 tight end, and it is what it is. Mark Andrews is the guy, and I don't see that changing.
Yeah, and it's also important to note we talked about the slow start for Mark Andrews. Last year, from week 6 to 17, Andrews ended up being the tight end 5 in fantasy points with 151, right? We've seen guys, coach, with these tightrope injuries on the ankle. We've seen just a lot of these injuries in general with the ankles. Like, a lot of times it takes guys an extra year sometimes to be that same player. And Mark Andrews isn't that old. I mean, we're talking about a player who's 29 right now at the tight end position. That's practically a rookie these days. These guys that are elite, like, they play very well into their late 30s, right? We're seeing it with Travis Kelce now. We saw it with Tony Gonzalez. We've seen it with a lot of players, and Mark Andrews is arguably one of the best tight ends in this past decade, right? And so I think it's important. You mentioned the tight ends, the touchdowns. He had 11 last year, career high. I expect those to come down a little bit, but you also look at the fact that fantasy points per game, he had 11 touchdowns last year, and the year before he had more points per game with half of those touchdowns. A lot of that has to do with the yards after catch. Also, keeping in mind that he played less games, but he did not have as strong yards after catch, right? And I think some of that again contributed to coming back from that ankle injury. And what Mark Andrews does on the offensive line as a blocker is something that Isaiah Likely cannot do. We know this. You have Derrick Henry, right? You want to run the football, right? Having Mark Andrews in those formations when you're running a heavy front, right, and allowing him to leak out, like, it's just going to continue to open up more opportunities for him. And again, I just Isaiah Likely is not the same blocker. I don't think he's a terrible blocker, but he's not somebody you're going to stick in line like Mark Andrews and feel comfortable. And Mark Andrews can play in the slot as well. He doesn't have to play in line. He can go in the slot and be effective there. They didn't add a big time weapon in the red zone. They have Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman. They still have Henry and Lamar, who are two big factors there. But I think those two players open things up for Mark Andrews. They brought in D Hop, but I don't know. Is D Hop a player that has any juice left, in your opinion?
No, probably not. And I think people don't realize it's important to be a complete player. I think that a lot of people think that you put the guy in, that's the route runner when you throw it, and you put the
Mhm.
blocker in when you run it. It doesn't work like that, right? Mark Andrews can do both. Uh, that's why he's going to be on the field. And you brought up the age thing. I think he's same age as Jonnu Smith, maybe a tad younger. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many guys that are right there. I mean, Mark Andrews has got 3 or 4 solid years left. I really believe that, and I don't see that fading anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm with you. Of course, I've been a big believer in Andrews. I think this is a really good discount. I'm picking him up in best ball drafts at this cost as much as I can. But next player we're going to talk about here is Tucker Kraft, who, if you've watched the YouTube, right, you know a lot of guys on this channel are big Tucker Kraft fans. He was tight end 10 last year. He's got an ADP of 104. Is tight end 10 this year, right? So he's being drafted at what he finished as last year. He could be the pass catcher to own in this offense, coach. I mean, you know, Jordan Love came out this offseason and said a big part going into this season is going to be finding ways to continue to get Tuck the ball, get him as many touches as we can in games. He's a dynamic playmaker, and that's going to be a focus. Now, a lot of coach speak and players speak in this situation. You can't read into it too much, but the stats for Tucker Kraft are pretty glaring. It was fourth in total touchdowns at the tight end position last year with 7. You know, this is a guy who I think could be the main target for Jordan Love, 7th in receiving yards, right? And he was just 18th in targets, 18th in receptions. Talk to me about Tucker Kraft. I mean, am I over my skis here on him, or is he another guy that's a really good value?
Well, there was a considerable jump from his rookie year to his second year in targets. I do think he'll go from 70 targets to somewhere around 90 targets. That would be my guess. I do think one thing about Tucker Kraft is he's a really good athlete at his
Sure.
position, which really helps. There is a little concern that Green Bay, spreads the ball around a lot, and that could hurt him. He did have a considerable amount of touchdowns considering the target rate that he got, which there's a lot of ways to look at that. I tend to think if he gets 90 targets, he's going to minimum repeat the same touchdown performance again, which would lead to him being an extreme value as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I do want to make a note when I brought up Tucker Kraft and his ADP, he's actually going pick 132 and he's tight end 12. So scratch that from the record book there, but that's actually much cheaper, right? We said 104,
Mhm.
he's going 132, so it's 30 spots back. And I think your point's valid there, coach. I mean, I know there's concern about will they spread the football out. This is a team that likes to run the football, but I think it's also important to note that these pass catchers have yet to show they can be trusted. I think Romeo Dobbs is like the most trustworthy pass catcher in this offense, likely, and he still has a good amount of drops, right? And so the whole offense as a whole had a ton of drops. Now, I think he's going to be the number one target in the red zone, right? We lost Christian Watson last year, who had 8 targets in the red zone last year, and now you're going to get Tucker Kraft here, who was decently high, right, in the red zone. He was 12th in the red zone at targets. He finished again as the tight end 10 last year. He showed a high level of athleticism at the position. I expect his role to increase, right? I just think he also had 70 targets in 2024, which was up from his rookie season. I'm not worried about Luke Musgrave. I think even if his volume increases a little bit, we talked about 18th in targets, coach, 18th in receptions, and he was able to be hyper efficient with those. It's not like he's a non-athletic guy who just had like a fluke of a season. This is a guy that ran a 4.69 40-yard dash, right? So, and he was also averaged 2.44 yards per separation on open target separation, which was 4th in the NFL per player profiler. He's a guy that I'm targeting, coach. I think his value is super cheap. Again, these are guys, all of them, that if you're not drafting tight end high, they're all coming at some pretty good values in their offenses.
Well, he was good value last year. I really believe that. And fast forward to next year, I don't see a world where he doesn't get more targets than he got last year. Like, I would be shocked if he got anything less than 90 targets this year. So that would make him incredible value this coming season.
Yeah, I'm with you. And moving on to our next player it's going to be Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry's being drafted at 170. I think it's pretty disrespectful. I know he's 30 years old and he's been around, it feels like, for a while. But again, we've talked about the age for tight ends, and that's not really that old for a tight end. This is a guy that has produced, right? Last year, he finished as tight end 12. And you noted here 9 games of 9 points or more. You're getting a really good floor in an offense that's really in dire need of weapons for the young quarterback in Drake May.
Yeah, and we talked about Tucker Kraft. Hunter Henry was kind of the opposite. I mean, a guy that got 97 targets to only catch 2 touchdowns seems kind of shocking to me. I don't see a world where the touchdown numbers don't go up. I mean, if you're going to get 98 targets, I mean, I expect him to catch 5 touchdowns at least. So some of that's just bad luck and things here and there. And I do think Vrabel's style is going to change the way New England plays football a little bit, which tends to lend itself more to play action passes and the ball in tight ends' hands more. And I think that'll help Hunter Henry, especially when it comes to the red zone.
Yeah, I think Hunter Henry is a case of not flashy, not sexy, been around for a long time, right? And I mean, when you look at his stats over his career, points per game, 9.1 last year, 8.6, then 6.1, 9.7, 10.4, 12.3, 10.6, 10, right? I mean, it's not like he's put up these astronomical points, but I mean, when you think about Hunter Henry, as you said, he's likely going to be the number one option in the red zone, and those touchdowns should go up. That offense was bad. Josh McDaniels is in town. We know Josh McDaniels likes to get the tight end the football. I mean, we've seen it time and time again with his time with the Patriots. Now he's back. I expect the offense to be much better. And again, I just think Hunter Henry's a stale name. It's not a name that you're getting excited about when you want to draft at the position. You feel like there's not a ton of upside, but this is a guy 170. You're taking a Hunter Henry coach with a guy like a Colston Loveland or a Tyler Warren, where if you do want to draft 2 tight ends and maybe you feel like, hey, Colson Loveland might start the year off slow, but I want him for that back half of the second year. Or Tyler Warren, same thing, could start the year off slow as a rookie, but could have a dominant back half of the season. You get a guy like Hunter Henry if you want to roster 2 tight ends, which I don't always do, but in redraft, if you do roster 2 tight ends, Hunter Henry can give you a safe floor. Well, maybe even having a decent ceiling, and you can wait for those guys to kind of find their rhythm.
Well, yeah, Hunter Henry is the definition of value. Him and Drake May have really good rapport. That helps. I mean, obviously Diggs is in town. That'll change things a little bit. But
Sure.
outside of Diggs, there is nobody else. So Hunter Henry is going to get targets. I mean, he's going to get peppered with targets. I think Austin Hooper, the other tight ends, got somewhere around 45 targets. I don't think he's much of a threat. Henry's going to keep doing his thing, and he's just going to be a guy that if you're picking later and you need a tight end, he's a guy you need to target.
Yeah, and I do want to say, you got to show Pop Douglas a little bit of love, okay? I think
All right, fair.
I think he's going to be a little bit better than people expect. He's got some pop for his name being Pop. Um, the last guy we're going to talk about today is going to be Evan Engram. Tight end 32 last year. We know why, right? He missed a decent amount of time with that hamstring injury. This year, right now, he's going somewhere around tight end 10, tight end 11. He's going around like the 120 range. And I think it's good value, right? I mean, he's a guy you look at, he's right next to Mark Andrews in terms of his ADP. He's starting to kind of creep up there in drafts. He was going a lot later, but Sean Payton gets a new weapon. Hunter Henry finds himself in an offense. This could be the best situation he's ever been in his entire career. Talk to me about talk to me about Evan Engram and why you think he's a guy that's a good value.
Well, for starters, just being in Denver is a major upgrade for Evan Engram. Evan Engram is one of the best route running tight ends in the game. Like, he can really get open. He does fantastic things when it comes to separation and such, especially for a tight end. Last season, he played in 9 games and had 67 targets. Like, I realized that was in Jacksonville, but there's a reason for that. The dude just gets open. And I think Bo Nix really needs that. That's something he didn't have last year. And I think Evan Ingram's going to be a guy that when Bo Nix gets in a little bit of trouble, he uses him as his safety valve. And I'd be shocked if Evan Engram in the Sean Payton Joker role doesn't find a way to get 100 targets.
Well, I did mention Evan Engram before when we talked about Njoku, right? Evan Engram,
Mhm.
same as Njoku, one of 5 tight ends with 90 plus targets on average the last 3 straight seasons. Now, obviously, his season was cut short last year, but if you still take 143, 98, and 64, he still is in that 90 plus targets on average for the last 3 years. And there's a guy who missed 8 games last year. So, I think Hunter Henry was keep talking about Hunter Henry. Evan Engram was sold on this Joker role with Sean Payton, right? It was between the Chargers and between Denver. I've talked about it before. I'll talk about it again. I think Payton sold him on his plans for the utilization in this offense. Health is a big factor, right? But he had 4 straight seasons where he played 15 or more games in 2020 to 2023. Last year, he had the hamstring injury. It was a dumpster fire of a team, a lot of mess. And I think maybe he also, it wasn't rushing to come back to a team that wasn't extremely competitive. Like you mentioned, and I mentioned, I think it's the best situation he's been in his entire career. Low target competition. I think he's going to get the second most targets on this Denver offense. And I know he's 30 years old, but again, for a tight end, like I'm not super concerned about guys at that age. These guys age very, very well. So I'm all in on Evan Engram at this cost. About, like I said, somewhere around that 110, 120 range. He's getting drafted about where Mark Andrews is, maybe tight end 7, tight end 8 range.
Yeah, I mean, I do think he finds himself in a better offense with a better play caller, with a better quarterback. Everything about the situation he's in now is better than the situation he left. I think as a whole, that's going to inspire Evan Engram to stay healthier as it comes and as the season arrives. And I do think he'll play really good football, and it could very well be the best season of his career upcoming, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would hope so. I'm obviously a Broncos fan. That's no surprise. But that's gonna do it for us, guys. Thank you so much for watching, Coach. Thanks for jumping on, and we'll see you guys next time.
To me, it's looking counterfeit. I get done with one, then move right on to another bitch.